Red and blue lights danced across my driveway, in wild flashes as I watched. 17-year-old Brandon Miller getting cuffed with his arms behind his back. The kid was nearly shrieking at the officers, his voice cracking in fury as he screamed about his rights and how his mother would see them all fired. Meanwhile, I stood calmly next to my spotless yellow Lamborghini Huracan, explaining to the lead officer precisely what had happened. Neighbors trickled from their homes like moths, drawn to flame, collecting on sidewalks and peeking from windows. Their hushed chatter formed a chorus of disbelief that Karen Miller, our dictatorial HOA president, had raised a son capable of such bold criminal acts. Just 3 months earlier, I had moved into Willowbrook Estates with nothing but anticipation, and my treasured Lamborghini. The elite neighborhood felt ideal. Manicured lawns, flawless sidewalks, and the promise of tranquil suburban life. My tech consulting firm had finally grown to the point where I could afford both the dream car and dream home, and for the first time, I truly felt I'd made it. The opening weeks went smoothly as I settled into a rhythm, often admiring how the Lamborghini gleamed in the circular driveway of my corner lot house. Then Karen Miller showed up, and everything shifted. She arrived on my doorstep one Tuesday morning, dressed in a cream blazer and holding a leather-bound portfolio that radiated authority. Karen appeared to be in her late 40s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She introduced herself as HOA president and gave me a welcome colder than a tax audit. Her eyes kept drifting toward my Lamborghini, and I could practically hear the calculations whirring in her brain. She made a few pointed remarks about the car being a bit showy for such a peaceful neighborhood, and hinted that I should consider keeping it in the garage to preserve the community's appearance. Karen's subtle disdain didn't stay subtle for long. It evolved quickly into a full-blown vendetta against my car. 2 weeks later, I got my first official warning, citing a vague rule about vehicles that might disrupt the neighborhood's quiet atmosphere. It was typed neatly on HOA letterhead, signed in Karen's loopy, self-important signature. When I reviewed the bylaws, I found the clause so broadly written could apply to any car that wasn't beige or gray. I chose to ignore it, assuming she'd lose interest eventually. I was wrong. Karen doubled down, sending increasingly harsh letters accusing me of noise violations, supposed speeding, and claiming the car invited unwanted attention to our peaceful streets. Each notice came with rising fines, starting at $50 and creeping up to $200. But what really caught my attention was her son Brandon, who had begun lurking around whenever his mother and I clashed in the driveway. The kid hovered nearby, listening closely as Karen lectured me on community values. Brandon was tall for a teenager and oozed entitlement that set my nerves on edge. Things came to a head on a sticky Thursday afternoon in late August. I was out front washing my Lamborghini when Brandon strolled up alone for the first time. He carried himself with the swagger of someone who'd never faced a real consequence. Chest out, chin up, full of attitude. Without even saying hello, he ordered me to hand over my keys. Claimed that, since his mom ran the HOA, she technically owned everything, including my car. The sheer nerve of it left me speechless. I eventually laughed at how ridiculous it was, then explained to Brandon that HOA leadership doesn't entitle anyone to residence, personal property. I added that his understanding of the law and his mother's power was wildly off base. His face flushed red as I kept laughing. He shouted that I'd regret disrespecting his family and stormed off, but not before spinning around to yell that I had no idea what his mother was capable of that night around 2:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by odd noises outside. Living alone had made me extra sensitive to anything out of the ordinary. I grabbed my phone and checked the security feed I'd installed since Karen's antics began. What I saw chilled me. Brandon was crouched beside my Lamborghini, armed with what looked like a crowbar and screwdriver. He was clearly trying to break in. His actions were clumsy but determined, and I could already see scratches forming where he jammed the tools into the door handle. My hands trembled as I called 911, whispering that a break-in was in progress. The dispatcher said officers were en route and told me to stay inside and keep watching the feed. I stayed glued to the screen. As Brandon grew more agitated, clearly outmatched by my car security system, he kept glancing toward his house, maybe hoping for backup. But Karen's light stayed off. He'd obviously decided to take matters into his own hands without alerting her. Police sirens howled in the distance, getting louder every second. Brandon must have heard them too, because he suddenly straightened up and started scanning his surroundings in a panic, but instead of fleeing, he doubled down, furiously attacking the car door again with rising desperation. As the first patrol unit rounded the corner, its spotlight lighting up the street, Brandon was still next to my Lamborghini, tools in hand, caught red-handed in the middle of an attempted grand theft auto. The officer's voice rang out across the cul-de-sac, ordering Brandon to drop the tools and step away from the car. What followed was so painfully predictable. It was almost funny. As the cops approached with hands resting near their weapons, Brandon began screaming about who his mother was and how she ran the whole neighborhood. He claimed he was just retrieving his family's property and warned the officers they regret meddling in HOA affairs. The lead officer, a seasoned veteran with silvering hair who clearly wasn't new to spoiled teens, remained unfazed. Within minutes, Brandon was cuffed, and I was handing over the surveillance footage as clear proof of the break-in. Karen showed up seconds later, wearing a bathrobe and slippers, just as her son was being loaded into the back seat of a squad car. She erupted instantly, shrieking about false arrests and police misconduct, demanding they let her son go. But once she realized how damning the evidence against Brandon was, her approach shifted. Suddenly I was to blame. According to Karen's deranged reasoning, I had intentionally left an expensive car in my driveway as bait to lure her innocent son into crime. The officers listened with impressive restraint before explaining that attempted grand theft auto was still a felony, no matter how she tried to spin it. Charges were filed within 2 days. Attempted auto theft, property damage, and criminal mischief. The gouges along my Lamborghini's door would cost over $3,000 to fix, elevating the incident into felony territory. Karen hired a high-end lawyer and threatened to countersue for defamation, but the video was damning. Her son had been caught red-handed, and no amount of legal gymnastics could erase that. Then came the real fallout. Other residents started coming forward, sharing their own encounters with Karen's bullying and Brandon's growing hostility around the neighborhood. The HOA board held an emergency session to deal with the escalating mess, and Karen soon faced a vote of no confidence from the same people she'd lorded over for years. Local media caught wind of the scandal. HOA president's son tries to steal Lamborghini, and Karen's professional reputation began to collapse. Her employer, a respected law firm downtown, immediately distanced itself from the headlines. Brandon was eventually sentenced to 18 months in juvenile detention and ordered to pay full restitution for the damage he caused. When the judge read the verdict, Karen let out a guttural wail that echoed through the courtroom, her face falling. As reality sank in, her son would spend the next year and a half behind bars for a crime born of arrogance and privilege. The HOA had already voted her out, 8-1, with Karen casting the lone, dissenting vote clinging to power, even as it slipped from her fingers. Her former subjects now spoke openly, unafraid to recount the climate of fear she created in Willowbrook Estates. The local paper ran a follow-up. Ex-HOA president sued after son's arrest, reporting that 3 families were now pursuing civil cases against her for harassment and abuse of power. Karen's firm, under mounting pressure, quietly asked for her resignation after clients began questioning their association with someone whose family made front-page news for attempted car theft. Her carefully curated image as a pillar of suburban leadership was gone, replaced by legal trouble and public disgrace. As the bailiff led Brandon away in chains, Karen turned back to glare at me one last time, her expression twisted with the kind of hatred only felt by someone who has never faced real consequences. But her intimidation had lost its teeth, reduced now to the empty fury of a woman who'd finally learned that actual consequences exist outside her petty empire of mailbox codes and grass height ordinances.